Akash from the marketing team at HackerEarth. And today, ladies and gentlemen, you are about to get a look at the future of coding interviews. I'm really glad that you're here, and I really want to thank you on behalf of all my friends and colleagues at HackerEarth who've helped build this product and who've helped put this event together. Now, we've got a lot of exciting stuff that we want to show you tonight. The first item that we've got for you today in the event is a really nice keynote from our CEO Sachin Gupta, who's going to deliver the story on why and how we built FaceCode. So I'd like to invite Sachin onto the dais to come deliver the keynote and tell us why we built FaceCode. How are you doing, Sachin?
Hey Akash, I'm doing well. Thanks for the introduction.
Awesome.
Super excited to be here today. Should I just dive into the keynote?
Yeah, sure. I'm really excited to hear what you've got to tell us, and really looking forward to your keyword. So please go ahead. The stage is all yours.
So we've got a packed agenda today. We'll start with the presentation, and then we'll move on to an actual mock interview, and then there's a panel discussion towards the end. So without wasting too much time, let me dive into it. What's the story behind us building out FaceCode and how it all came to be? So last year, March, the pandemic hit us all over the world, and every business that at least I know of had to react to it in one form or the other. Recruiting was no different. Recruiting has seen a fairly significant impact over the last 12 months. The one immediate impact was that the volume of hiring went down, and a lot of people were not hiring, and then almost everyone had to adapt very quickly to a completely virtual process. And that was, definitely, of course, one had to do it in all aspects of business, but recruiting, at least the interviewing stage of recruiting had been very, in person, the whole human touch and face to face. So that was a big, massive change. And we saw, while we did see a dip in hiring, we saw a sudden increase in the volume of technical video interviews or virtual interviews that organizations were doing. Because if you look at the whole technical recruiting process, sometimes we have up to 4 or 5 in-person interviews, and all of them had to be moved to a virtual platform. Some of the other things that COVID has impacted is communication and coordination has become expensive. Tasks take longer to complete virtually, particularly the ones that involve collaboration. And what that results is that there's lesser time available for coding interviews. Worst of all, the fact that there are so many meetings that are virtual meetings that are happening, it does, and add video interviews to that, it does add to the overall video meeting fatigue. So even before the pandemic hit, we had an assumption, and for lack of a better word, we felt that virtual interviews were broken. Now, there are two groups of people. One who are not using any tool at all, and they're just patching up a video calling tool like Zoom, along with, say, a whiteboard or a Google Doc. And I think that's definitely not an experience that you want to have either for your interviewers or for the candidates. But then there are certain people who do use certain platforms which allow you at least a collaborative IDE. And while that's better than what you would have otherwise, we don't think it, we very strongly felt that it did not cut the bill. So what we did was, we decided, let's go out and validate our hypothesis. We have certain assumptions. Let's see what people have to say about it. So between, I would say, April, May, and up till I would say about August, we spent hours and hours interviewing developers, hiring managers, and recruiters to understand what their challenges are, and particularly how are they getting magnified or amplified because of COVID. And you know what, our instincts were right. While our initial assumption was that virtual interviews are broken, what we realized was that the reality is that coding interviews in general are broken. And the way coding interviews were happening even before it was all virtual was quite inefficient, and there was significant room for improvement. We particularly found out 3 problems that caught our attention. The first is lack of preparation. So, you talk to any engineer and they'll tell you that interviewing is not something that they really enjoy. Everybody wants to write code, they want to solve interesting problems, and interview is just an unnecessary but important or unavoidable distraction, and they have to do that. So what that means is they would often not spend a lot of time preparing for those interviews. But the fact is, interviewing is a very high leverage activity. If you do it right, you make the right hire, you would you would get up to 2x or 3x return on that. But if you do it the wrong way and you end up hiring the wrong person, the cost of a wrong hire is extremely high. In case of engineering, it could be up to 6 to 9 months, because the first 3 4 months are just spent in ramping up the person, so you won't even know up until they've spent about 6 to 9 months in the system. So obviously, not just in terms of monetary loss, but in terms of even the time spent is extremely high. So this is an activity that definitely requires preparation. The second is, interviewing is very, very subjective. No matter how much one tries, there is always the possibility of human bias creeping in. And there are today organizations which are spending time on standardizing their interviews and defining interview rubrics, but it's still very, very early days for something like that. A lot of people do not even get trained before they do their first interview, and hence people resort to kind of, for a lack of a better word, again, winging the whole interview, and just their analysis of or their evaluation of the person on the other side of the screen could be biased by what they see, let's say, towards the last 10 minutes of the interview. So there is recency bias. It could be biased based on if they find a specific problem or a question, they're particularly fond of it, and if the person is able to kind of maybe answer that in a certain way, they might get biased. So overall, the evaluation may not always be very holistic, and definitely not thoroughly skill based. And the third point, which really caught our attention, was interviewers were spending too much time on writing feedback. So I'll kind of quickly go through those very quickly. Like I said, lack of preparation meant interview questions were chosen on the fly. There was also the danger of questions being available outside. So sometimes you would end up putting a question that the candidate has already seen. Now that's not necessarily the worst thing, but it does impact the overall quality of the interview. You would want the candidate to be able to think on their feet during the interview, and if they have already seen that question, that does make that doesn't result in the best experience from an interviewer perspective. Like I said, lack of a standardized interview rubric and an objective scoring system results in a massive potential for bias and inefficiency creeping in. And like I said, the third aspect is too much time being spent on feedback. Now, again, there are, I would say, there are two kinds of people here. By the way, none of the folks that we spoke with said that, hey, I enjoy writing feedback, because we've already spent probably 20 minutes kind of preparing for the interview, 45 minutes to an hour taking the interview, and now you have to spend another 20-25 minutes in documenting the entire interview and how did it go. And nobody wants to spend that much time doing this. Now, there are two types of people. One who would actually put in those 20 to 30 minutes, or even more in certain cases, in collecting their notes, reflecting back on the conversation, and submitting a well-written feedback, and others who would procrastinate. And then the recruiting team ends up chasing them, and then 2 days later they would submit something, and that is right. That has a lot of potential for being inefficient. You may not remember all aspects of the conversation. You may only remember, say, what happened at the end. And one tends to give an overall gut feeling based assessment on the one would just say, hey, okay, I want to hire or no hire. While you do want an objective outcome like that, but you also want to understand why hire and why not hire. A lot of organizations today do a group huddle after all the interviewers have completed their interviews, and they go through the feedback. And in that case, if you happen to be a lead engineer and your feedback is, say, hire or no hire, and you're the loudest person in the room, then a lot of people would go along with you. In those scenarios, having a well-written summary or feedback is extremely important to really peel the layers of the onion and understand what happened in the interview. After all the research, we spent about, I would say, about 3 to 4 months building out the solution, conceptualizing it. We again went back to the users with whom we tested it. Even before we wrote the first line of code, we actually put the screens in front of them and asked them what the feedback was. And based on that, this is what we've come up with. So the solution to the lack of preparation is a library of questions. So FaceCode provides you the ability to pick pick and choose questions from HackerEarth question of library of questions, which is a pre-curated. There's an SME team at HackerEarth which actually goes through all those questions, and we try to provide you the best quality of questions. But in addition to that, one can also build out their own library of questions. So we allow people to add their own questions, and because we are making interviews more objective, because we are collecting feedback and generating scoring for all these interviews, over a period of time, we will be able to also share analytics with you on how a certain set of candidates have performed on certain questions. So it's not just being able to share your interview questions within your organization, but also sharing some intelligence with it. The second aspect is there's no standardized criteria, and the way we solve it is we have the ability to define scoring parameters. And these scoring criteria are, if you don't want to define your own, we provide you with 4 predefined criteria. And again, these criteria have been identified after discussion with multiple people who do interviews. And during the interview and post the interview, you get to give your score on these criteria. Score and score and feedback. We'll come to that in a little bit in our demo. And then this used for various for further purposes. But the idea here is that as you're interviewing the person, you should not be having to index all the let's say you should not be making mental notes on all the different skills and competencies on which you want to assess the candidate. That is something that should be in front of you. And as you are analyzing the responses being given by the other person, you should be at a very high level, quickly be able to rate them. And hence you don't have to remember everything that happened in the interview, but yet ensure that the overall evaluation of the interview is highly objective. And the final, our solution to the time that is being spent on writing those feedback was, what we decided was we decided we will collect all possible data that we can collect during the interview, like the interviewer notes, the score that is given by the interviewer, the information that we pick up from the code editor, like how much time the person spent and things like those, and take all of that together and use that to automatically generate an interview feedback for you. So now as an interviewer, you spend 45 minutes doing the interview, and then you spend a couple of minutes putting in your scores, and there you have an automatically generated interview feedback. And of course, you can edit, and again, we'll do a live demo and it'll become more clear. But we are doing majority of the heavy lifting for you to write this feedback. And all of this data is again collated in one single report. So there is a system of record, there is a history of the entire interview, how it transpired. So I don't want to talk too much through presentations, and I would like to jump on to the product demo itself. I'm excited that we have our CTO, Vishy, who would be taking my interview. So I'm both excited and a little bit nervous because I haven't done this in a long time.
All right, guys. So I hope all of you can see the screen. This is basically what FaceCode is all about. But before we get started with the interview itself, let me show off a new cool bit that we've actually implemented. So anytime you want to create a new interview, and if you are signed up for HackerEarth, obviously, all you need to do is interview.new, right? This is the domain that we've set up exclusively for setting up interviews going forward, right? You are a HackerEarth user, you go to your browser, type interview.new, and basically what you get is something which lets you schedule your interview, something like this, right? So you quickly type out what is your interview title, what is the candidate name, email, etc. You type out when you want to select the timing of the interview, etc. Time zone if you need to, and you can say start now. That's about it. So this is how you would go about scheduling your interviews going forward. And I hope you like the rest of the demo as well. So Sachin, are you ready for the grilling that we have in store for you?
Oh yes, Vishy. Both ready and like
great.
a little bit nervous.
All right, sounds good. So guys, I also have Ellis with me. Ellis, do you want to say hi to everyone?
Hey everyone, nice to be here. Sachin, excited to be interviewing you.
Thanks, Ellis.
All right, guys. So Sachin, let's get started with the interview. First up, let me try to pull up a coding question for you, which I typically ask, all my candidates. So here's something that I'm going to choose from the library itself. Let's see. All right. So Sachin, can you confirm if you see a question on the left-hand pane of the window?
Yes, I can see.
All right, great. So this is your standard Fibonacci series question, Sachin. I assume you would have heard about it before. Basically, the program should take an input n as an integer and then output as many number of elements from the Fibonacci series. So would you be able to take a stab at that?
Yeah, let's do that. So before I start writing, I would actually like to kind of discuss the approach that I want to use, and then maybe jump into coding. So as you know, Fibonacci number, let's say we want to find out the nth Fibonacci number. It is basically the sum of n-1 and n-2. So that's what we need to really implement in the code, basically a conditional statement that goes up to the number of times we want the Fibonacci numbers to be printed, and every time it computes the sum of the previous two numbers and prints that. Now there is one base condition, of course, that the first Fibonacci number is 1. So we start with that. And for me to be able to implement a neat code, what I would also like to do is arbitrarily define the 0th Fibonacci numbers as 0. So basically, my first Fibonacci number becomes 1, and then second becomes the sum of 1 and 0, which is also 1, and then so on. So does that make sense?
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds like a good approach. Let's go ahead with the code, maybe.
Okay. So I'm comfortable writing code in Python. So I think I can change my language. Is it okay if I do that?
Yeah, sure. So this is Python 3, just to be sure, the one that you've selected. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. So because the number of the input is n, or the number of Fibonacci numbers we want. So let's take that as an input first. Then, like I said, the base condition for me is 0th and first Fibonacci number, which is 0 and 1. And essentially, I will loop through the number of times I want the Fibonacci numbers to be printed. I'll print the first Fibonacci number, which is always, I'll print n1. And then I will compute the next Fibonacci number, which is n1 plus n0. And then basically reassign my values of n0 and n1. So n0 becomes n1, and n1 becomes n2. And it'll run as many times as as the number of Fibonacci numbers we want. So let me input 5 and see if I've written the right code. Yeah, it looks like that.
All right. Yeah, that looks good. So Sachin, I can see that you've gotten most of it right. However, I do see an edge case missing here. Would you be able to point that out?
Okay. There. So we have number of Fibonacci numbers. Okay. Yeah, I think I did miss out one edge case, and that is what happens if n is less than equals to 0. Basically, we'll say no numbers. And so is this the one that you were referring to?
Yes, that looks complete now.
Okay.
Got it. Cool. Thank you so much for doing this, Sachin. I would also want you to sort of attempt maybe a design question. So I'm going to switch over from the code editor to a diagram board. Let me know if you can see that. Can you see a diagram board on your screen?
Yeah, I can.
All right, great. So I have a user here, if you can see, and I also have an e-commerce website, kind of laid out here. What I would want from you is if you can draw out maybe at a very high level what is the flow like for any e-commerce website user, right? When the website user actually visits the website and tries to check out, let's say, an item.
Okay. So basically, let me before I jump into drawing, let me kind of again discuss the approach, and then we can go ahead with the drawing. So you're saying the overall high-level structure. So in e-commerce website, I think there are a few key entities that one needs to take care of. The first is the categories, I would say. So, because there's a catalog of products, so let's call it categories where I as a user can browse what all products or items I want to purchase. The second entity would be the items themselves, like which ones I want to buy. The third would be a checkout flow, or let's say a cart, a shopping cart, where I can put in all the items that I have selected. And the fourth, the last one would be the checkout flow, where we would have a payment gateway and the entire checkout process. And then one more item, I would say, which is kind of a backend, which is my inventory. So as a user, I don't directly interact with it, but this is what feeds into my e-commerce website. So those are the four components. If that sounds good, I can start, labeling it.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the first one would be, like I said, categories. So let me quickly label it. The second is the items the items that I will be buying. The third is the cart and the shopping cart, and the fourth is the checkout flow. So, and the final is the inventory. Okay, and I'll quickly build out the relationships as well. So inventory feeds into the website. I as a user browse categories, then I select items. I add those items into my cart, and finally, this is where I build out the checkout flow.
Got it. Got it. So Sachin, just as a follow-up, if you were to actually build this out, in terms of the architecture, how would you go about, designing these components?
So I think at the high level, I would say I would implement each one of them as a separate microservice, because I can see scenarios in which all of them are would require a massive horizontal scale up. And then at least I think for inventory and maybe for the catalog or categories, they can have some further subcategories, sub microservices. For example, inventory would have warehousing and supply chain and things like those. So it depends upon the complexity of the platform that we're building out, but at least I see these 5 different microservices being written.
Sounds good. So I think, Sachin, I am done grilling you enough. I would request you to step back into the webinar and guide us through the rest of the demo.
Good. Thank God I survived. Okay, so yeah.
Great job, Sachin.
Thanks, Alice. Okay, so I'm back here. So yeah, let's continue with the rest of the product demo, Vishi.
Sure.
Can you start by scoring me?
Yeah. So I'm going to try and end the interview here.
So as you can see on the screen, guys, I believe Vishi did score me while I was being interviewed, and then there are some other parameters that he did not score me on, which when he ends the interview automatically comes up on the screen. And as an interviewer, I can obviously put in the rating for each criteria. And if I want to put any comments, I could do that. And then finally, we also ask for an overall recommendation. So this is a mandatory step. Once Vishi selects this and clicks on generate interview report, that's where a lot of heavy lifting will be done by the platform. So what we're going to do, while this is happening is the system is taking inputs from your scores, the notes that Vishi took, the code that I wrote, the time that I spent on coding, the conversation we had, and things like those. And it generates an overall report. I'll walk you through the core components of this report. The first one is the interview summary or the feedback. So as you can see, the system has automatically generated a 7-8 line long feedback for you, and this clearly does most of the heavy lifting for you. So we are talking about how was the conversation quality, And you would say it says did not have an engaging conversation because we were muted on FaceCode and talking on GoToWebinar. But if we were on FaceCode, it would have captured that. It talks about whether I asked clarifying questions, whether I was able to compile code, how many tasks I were able to complete, so on and so forth. If the interviewer wants, at this point, they can simply edit and either add on to this summary, edit this feedback, or if they want to make changes, they can do that. They can also copy this feedback for quick sharing with their panelists or the recruiting team. The second section are the insights. So as you can see, we track the conversation time, total time spent talking. So imagine you are a recruiter and you get a feedback from an interviewer that says reject, but that person has aced all other interviews. So you look at an insight like what was even the total time spent talking. It's possible that maybe the interviewer or the candidate were having a bad day, and by looking at some of these insights, it gives you a sense of what might have happened. If you look at the old way of doing interview, there is really no other proof of, let's say, how the interview went, other than what an interviewer submits. We also track the talk to listen ratio. This tells you how engaged the candidate was, audio video on ratio, how much time the audio video was on, and then how much time was actually spent coding. Apart from that, we both collate and generate multiple data points. So we provide you the interview notes. So if you could scroll down a little bit. Yeah, so we provide you the interview notes that were written during the interview. We transcribe the audio, and that's available for you post interview. And then finally, we have an audio video recording of the entire session. These notes can be copied with a single click, and again, either put back into the interview feedback or shared with your colleagues. Moving on, the final section. We, obviously, the code that is written by the candidate is again available. We show it in the same format as the interview screen so that it's familiar. You can quickly copy the code, and then, again, if you want to use it as part of your feedback or your notes, you can do that. And finally, we have the interview, the scores. So all those scores that you gave during the interview will be available here. If you feel that probably you did not put the scoring the right way, you want to make some edits, that's always possible. You just click on edit scoring, and the platform takes you back to the interview screen. You can fill in your scores, and then obviously the entire report would be regenerated because scores are a key element, a key input for the automated feedback to be generated. And lastly, you can see the same report is generated for each interviewer separately. So Ellis, if he were to do his own rating, would give a certain score, would have a certain feedback summary. And as a lead engineer or a hiring manager who's responsible for that position, you can quickly cycle through the feedback that is coming from each interviewer, and then take an overall decision whether the candidate moves forward or not. So that very quickly is the entire interviewing, the report generation and the automated feedback feature that we rolled out. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the demo, and I hope you like what you see, and obviously these are the early stages of the product. We don't intend to stop here. We will continue to take feedback from our customers, and continue to iterate. And the idea is that it's not just for your virtual interviews, but even when, let's say, things change, we go back to the office, and we're doing an in-person interview, there is really no need for you to be doing this all on a whiteboard, and then trying to take notes on the side and then getting distracted because the candidate has probably moved on to the next question. So you have to think completed the first question, so now you need to think about the second question. So there are a lot of things that could go wrong in an interview because there are so many aspects that you have to take care of as an interviewer, and the idea is FaceCode should be there for you to make it happen. A very quick high-level summary of what all we've discussed so far. The platform obviously comes with pair programming, real-time code collaboration. We support 41 languages. There's audio and video. There's both one-on-one and panel interview options. And then, of course, as an interviewer, you can take notes, see who are the participants, and then have a private chat. And finally, it's not just about coding. You can also do system design interviews through the diagram board. On the sorry about that. Yeah. On the preparation side, we give you access to a library of questions, over which we will build analytics over a period of time. And it really takes away the I would say the mental load that you would have for which question to select, and you don't want to be scrambling through just before your interview starts. The third is the entire standardized objective rating system. So organizations which already have a predefined interview rubric, they can simply key in their interview rubric into FaceCode, and they can just start with that. And anyone who doesn't have that, they can use the predefined parameters, and that also helps. That also helps them do an automated report generation. And finally, it's we want to create a system of record for the interview. We want to make interviews less, I would say, unbiased, more objective, more skill driven, and we want to make your interviews more intelligent. So if there's a key theme that I would like you to go back with, and that is, we've been doing interviews the old way for a very long time, and now I think it's the time is right for us to look at intelligent technical interviews. The system should do a lot of heavy lifting for you so that you can actually focus on asking the right questions, on creating a good user experience, candidate experience, and most importantly, making an informed decision about the candidate based on their actual skills, and not something, not a perspective that you might have had at that particular point in time. Your interview should not go wrong just because you didn't come in prepared, or you had a bad day, or the candidate was not able to talk about certain aspects that you thought should have been in the interview. It should be objective, and it should be based on skills. And that's where the data points that we're collecting, the summary that we're generating, it really helps to tie all of that together. And like I said, stay tuned for towards the end of the event. We have something for you, and basically, we're giving away something on FaceCode. So stay tuned in. With this, I think we're going to move into our panel discussion, and I will hand it over to Akash to invite our guests and kick off the panel discussion.
That was a really great keynote, really great product demo. That was really awesome, guys. So what we've got next for you is a fireside chat, right? And we've got two guests who'll be talking to us, with Sachin. You got to see what the product's all about. You got to see it in action. And now you're going to meet some of our customers who use this product every day to, make their hiring happen. So let me call upon my guests. The first one, our first panelist today is Jeff Sterniak. And we've also got Amber. All right, you can see both of you right there. Okay, let me talk about Jeff first. So Jeff is a senior autonomy engineering manager at May Mobility. He lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan. May Mobility, as you might know, is a company that focuses on transforming cities through autonomous technology and to create like a safer, greener, and more accessible world. Now, Jeff is basically the guy that runs their robotics program. Right? He's got a ton of experience with building autonomous technology and autonomous vehicles. Now, one really cool thing about Jeff is that he homeschools his children, his three kids. They're aged 4, 7, and 9. And what's cool about them is that for a long time, Jeff has been responsible to take care of their math, teaching them math. But recently, he got a promotion. Jeff is also their snowboarding teacher, which means he teaches them how to snowboard like a couple times a week back in Michigan. What's cool is that he loves how his kids are learning snowboarding so fast, and because they're so small, they've got this really nice gravity, which lets them, makes them really good at snowboarding. So that's Jeff for you. Our second guest today is Amber. Hey, Amber. Hey, so Amber is a recruiter from Kansas City. She went to college at the University of Nebraska, and she works with Spring Venture Group. Now, Spring Venture Group is like is is an insurance sales giant with a strong focus on Medicare. While Amber has a lot of experience with hiring for all kinds of roles, everything from compliance to HR to operations, her specialty over the years has become technical recruiting. And when she isn't working, Amber's up to a lot of things. And one of them is that she has a pet boa constrictor, who's called Mitch. Now, she got Mitch as a part of a package deal with her husband, and over the years, she's grown really, really fond of him. So that is Amber. So Sachin, I'm going to hand the dice to you, and you guys can start talking about the future of coding interviews.
Thanks a lot for that, Akash. And welcome to Jeff and Amber. I'm very excited about our discussion today.
Thanks, good beer.
So yeah, thanks for coming. So let's start with the first question for this panel discussion. So, and maybe Jeff, you can go first. What challenges do you face with coding interviews today?
Yeah, you touched on a lot of them for the recruiters themselves in your keynote, which was a nice overview of a lot of the things that happen before and after the interview that can be challenging. The main thing in addition to that we struggle with is really getting the candidate comfortable and letting them show their own strengths. And so I think giving them an interface that lets them configure it and just have an environment where they're putting the things going on inside their mind to, not paper, but to the actual compiling environment is the main thing we've struggled with when we've tried to duplicate experiences we've had with like whiteboard coding sessions and things, but really just making the candidate comfortable so they can do what they do best in code.
Got it. So yeah, that's definitely a very valid aspect. I think a lot of people, particularly the ones who are new to interviewing or haven't done a lot of interviews, could become a little nervous, or they may not be at their best. And getting them to be comfortable, making them feel that they're in a familiar space is extremely important. So Amber, what's your perspective? Where do you think you face challenges today?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it's very similar across the board. I think the other piece that we deal with a lot with Spring is that we hire pretty niche technical positions. We're looking for individuals that have a lot of experience. And so those individuals are very high in demand and have always been a group that's very open to remote work, but especially since COVID, we've seen a lot more competition in regards to not just the coastal companies, but even overseas now at this point. And so we really want to make sure that they are provided with a easy, kind of carefree interview process so that they stay engaged, involved. We don't want to have too many steps in the process because from a time perspective, a lot of times they're interviewing with multiple companies. And so we don't want to lose out just based off of the timeline that we can make an offer. So really just kind of honing in on that experience and cutting down the timeline for our decision-making process, or because some of the things that we pretty constantly keep in mind and see if we can do process improvement on.
Got it. No, that makes so much sense. And so if I got it correctly, you're saying that you were already hiring remote employees, and obviously now with COVID, a lot of people becoming remote, that has become harder, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from a compensation standpoint and people being able to work 100% remote, again, I think out of the departments that I've recruited for, IT has always been more open to remote opportunities than other areas, but especially now, it's pretty much fair game. People can work for whoever, wherever it works for them. So lots of competition out there.
Yeah, and that makes it so much more important to ensure that the experience, the entire recruiting experience for the candidate is as good as it can be. Because even if you don't end up hiring that person, they'll still become your ambassadors if they had a good experience. So absolutely agree with you on that. So the next question is, and maybe we can start with you, Amber. How big is a problem? So how big is subjectivity, or let's say bias, a problem in coding interviews in IT hiring? And have you tried anything in the past to counter this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I mean, I think bias is always something that we want to keep in the forefront from a human resource standpoint. So I know for Spring Venture Group, we have mandatory training that everyone has to do, regardless of it's IT or marketing or human resources, that includes an entire training piece on bias. And so definitely want to bring it to the forefront in regards to people interviewing or before they've interviewed. Specifically with technology, we really focused on it a lot more at a previous company that I worked for, just because the size was much larger. I worked for a healthcare IT company that hired probably about 2,000 or so entry-level software engineers every year. And so in regards to some of the tools that I've seen utilized, whether it's at Spring Venture Group or at previous employers, we've done a lot with other platforms. The previous company that I worked for uses HireVue, and within HireVue, there's the code view feature. And so that's something that I'd been exposed to before. And it's actually something that we looked at when we first enrolled with HackerEarth. We looked at a couple of other companies, including CodeView, and we just felt like what HackerEarth was able to offer was more in line with what we needed for Spring Venture Group. So
that's really always good to hear that we are doing justice by our customers. So thanks a lot for that. And 2,000 entry-level software developers is massive. You can only imagine the amount of interviewing one would have to go through, and to make sure that you have a standardized quality bar, it's really important to have that to the whole interviewing aspect. So Jeff, over to you. What's your perspective? What do you think as a hiring manager? What's your perspective on subjectivity and bias?
Yeah, I mean, we like to think that because we're giving a fixed problem with an actual solution that there's no bias, but of course there can be bias introduced in many places. And so that's where in the past, I think our greatest successes have been when we just brought, I'm getting a lot of feedback. Is that just me? Sorry. Our greatest successes have been when we've gotten a group of people together and said, all right, what are the specific rubric for each question in particular that we're looking to score against? And so really for each question, what is the algorithm step identification of the problem that we're looking for to see in the candidate? So it's really just a yes, no question for those, and helps eliminate a lot of that bias.
Got it. So you're basically saying you have, really spent that time and effort to define what the interview rubric is for you, and that helps you cut down subjectivity in the process.
Absolutely. And I think it really has to be tailored for each question. And that's where some of that early prep work has to come in and take that investment to remove that from the system. Got
it. So the next one, have you tried standardizing coding interviews? And obviously looks like you've been doing that, but you did it before you started using HackerEarth, or was it once you had HackerEarth you standardized? Yeah, that was even before we had HackerEarth, but some of the interface there where you can just have it live in the tool for the interviewers to see really makes it easier. Got it. And what about you, Amber, at your org? Are you in a place today where you have standardized these coding interviews, or is that something you're still exploring?
Yeah, so we had standardized coding for our level 1 position, so software engineer 1s, data engineer 1s. When it gets into the senior software engineer solution architect, then we'll change the questions based off of the team that we're hiring for. But within an interview process, it's still that standardized questioning. So all the candidates that are interviewing for one particular position are going through the same process, but we do change it up depending on what team it is. So if you interview for a solution architect a couple of months ago, and then you have an interview for one today, if it's a different team, then those questions are going to be different. Got it. So, really, I must say, it's really heartening to see that both of you and your organizations have actually gone through the process of defining, what the interview rubric is going to be for you. And I'm sure you must also be spending time in kind of training the people, the people who are taking interviews. So, kudos to both of the organizations for putting in that effort.
at least in our research, when we went out and we started talking to people, we were surprised to see even some of the larger organizations were not very structured in the way they were approaching interviews. So, kudos on that, like I said. The next question is, and this one is specifically for you, Jeff, being a hiring manager, having interviewed tons of people, I think you would resonate with the fact that writing proper feedback, which actually is a fair reflection of the interview, is painstakingly time consuming. And so just want to get your perspective of how much of an impact do you anticipate if we are able to automate this process through the latest release that we have on FaceCode, what kind of impact it would have?
I think if we are able to come up with that rubric and actually identify those items that we're looking for programmatically, so people aren't having to do it in check boxes, and then provide verbal feedback, that you could easily cut out half of that feedback time, which is just free time for the developers to get back to other things. So I think there's an easy reduction from half an hour down to 15 minutes if we can automate more and more of that.
Got it. So great to know that our own hypothesis is kind of validated by that. And Amber, for you, on being on the recruiting side, I'm sure you must have been in scenarios where you've either seen inconsistencies in the feedback coming in from different interviews, or you had to chase your interviewers to kind of submit that feedback on time. So are there any anecdotes or any instances that you might want to share with us in the audience? And more importantly, what's your take on the impact that we can create if we were to automate some aspects of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think your latter statement about chasing down hiring managers for feedback probably rings true to most recruiters. I think the really nice thing about the automation aspect to it is who has access to it as well, because for our interview process and for most, there are several interviewers that are involved. And so being able to have a singular location to store that information where everyone involved in the interview process can see kind of what that initial feedback is throughout the process is also very helpful for us, so that we're not constantly trying to ping each other notes or catch each other in the hallway to be like, hey, this is kind of what I thought. So having just one centralized location for all that feedback to be housed that everyone has access to is also really handy for us too. So
that makes sense, and I can totally relate to you on the aspect of having to chase hiring managers. I've not been personally involved in that, but I've seen in the organization on both sides of the table. As a recruiting team, you are working on a clock. You want to get your candidate in quickly, and same is for the hiring manager. But then there are always conflicting priorities. So how does one deal with it? And our hypothesis, like I said earlier, was automating some aspects of it should definitely give back more time to the hiring managers and also make it more data oriented for the recruiters. So moving on, Jeff, your company designs autonomous vehicles and shuttles. What kind of engineering skills are you looking for when you hire? And how do you think regular engineering interviews fail when assessing for those skills?
Yeah, we're specifically, my team is the autonomy team. So we're really looking for people who are going to be able to contribute to the software that runs on the vehicle and takes in sensor data and makes the car drive. So we're really looking for people with strong software fundamentals and then theoretical and practical robotics experience. And so there are a couple different ends of the spectrum there where we really want to test pure software, but also give them an ability to show those kind of technical design and robotics experience aspects of their knowledge base. And so one of the issues we have is in order to do all that, you need a few different medium to accomplish that. So you need to be able to go through coding examples, and obviously FaceCode is kind of targeted towards that, but you also showed the kind of whiteboard diagramming aspect to it. And that's one where we've had to integrate other tools to also have sessions where people can get together and collaborate on coming up with the design, drawing boxes and arrows and showing how a system could be built up. And that's really where we've struggled, is just coming up with interfaces that allow people to have that really collaborative experience and show how they work in a team, critically break down a problem, and put a design together.
Got it. And the fact that you could do both of them on a platform like FaceCode, I'm assuming that does make the life a little bit easier, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, it's even the little things like having the small faces at the bottom so you can see the other team members there while you're doing it. It just creates that personal space without having to say, okay, I'll have the window where we're collaborating on this diagram over here, and I'll try to have a little window over here from another application so I can just get that face contact with other people. The fact that it's all in one place really leads to a streamlined experience.
Oh, absolutely. I can that point just hits home. You try doing a conversation where you can't see the other person and you're staring on at your own screen, and I would say the quality of the conversation is it's very, very poor, because we underestimate the amount of positive impact body language and context has on a conversation. And that's where I think the whole collaboration piece has gone for a toss because of pandemic. Hopefully we do get back to doing things the old way, if not completely the same old way, but some hybrid version. So Amber, the Spring Venture website says data is what we do, and I'm assuming you need top-notch data scientists and engineers to be able to provide real-world results to your users. So what's your typical process like when it comes to hiring engineers, and how has it changed or improved with FaceCode?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically for our engineering interviews, we start off with a phone screen. It's usually just about half an hour with our hiring manager to make sure that we get the chance to explain to the candidate what the team does, what the tech stack looks like, just kind of that initial communication touch base. And then after that, we go into the technical interviews, which depending on the position are anywhere from an hour to 2 hours using HackerEarth. And then we do a final interview. We're lucky that we're a small enough company that our executive vice president of technology meets with every candidate as well. So that's kind of the final piece to the interview, is a 30-minute touch base with Alex Curry. So we try to keep it, like I said, as quick as possible in terms of a timeline and how long it would take us to get an offer out to a candidate. But I'm so glad that Jeff mentioned the diagramming tool, because that has been a lifesaver for us. We do diagramming for all of our solution architect positions, and previously we had been trying to do file share, since last year when we couldn't bring candidates on site. But selling insurance, we have a lot of rules and regulations we have to follow with HIPAA, because we deal with people's financial and healthcare information. And so sharing files or using some of the tools that we use in-house wasn't an option for us from a compliance standpoint. So being able to utilize that within HackerEarth, which was a tool that my team was already comfortable with from an interview standpoint, has worked out really, really well. So
yeah, that's really nice to know, Amber, and glad to see that the process is a lot more streamlined and you're able to make it better both for the interviewers and the candidates. We're almost coming towards the end of the panel discussion. I've just got 2 more questions to go, and the next one is a little bit of a shameless request for both good and bad feedback, but just for the benefit of everyone listening in, what's been the overall experience with HackerEarth for your organization? And maybe we can start with you, Amber.
Sure. Yeah, we've really enjoyed the tool. We just started using it last year when we all ended up working remotely and no longer did on-site interviews. And like I said, it's been really user-friendly. We, along with everyone else, kind of had to change the interview process at a drop of a hat. And so it was trying to get a lot of trainings completed and get everybody on board with what interviews would look like moving forward. And so that was very easy with HackerEarth as far as just being user-friendly in general, but also just the tools that were provided and the resources to make sure that my team were comfortable with what their interviews would look like when they logged on, which I think is really nice, because as the representative for the company, I think you hate to log into a system not knowing what it's going to look like, not sure whether it'll work, not sure what roadblocks you might run into. And so being able to make everyone feel really comfortable and confident before we actually had our external interviews was really something that we wanted to make sure that we prioritized, even though we were working with a really quick turnaround timeline.
Got it. That makes so much sense. And Jeff, what's been your experience?
Yeah, we initially started by just using HackerEarth as a platform to screen candidates up front, but then we took your offer for trying out FaceCode. And I used to do a lot of wrap-ups with candidates, and number one comment I received was, it was a little weird using the interface we were using to code in. I mean, it wasn't built for it. It's just kind of like a collaborative text editor. And since then, the switch, I hear zero comments. They're just like, yeah, everything worked great. That was fun. And they really comment on how they enjoy the process now instead of, oh, well, that tool was cumbersome. So kudos to you.
Thanks a lot. That's music to my ears. Always good to hear that, like I said, we are doing justice by our customers, our users, and that you've enjoyed the experience. One last, question, and then we'll wrap up this panel. And I would like to put again both to you, Jeff and Amber, and maybe you could bring out your own contrasting perspectives on this. One from a hiring manager perspective, another from a recruiting perspective. What do you think the future of coding interviews would look like? And anything that either you feel that this is where we're going to towards, or you think, hey, if we had this, that would really change the life. So any perspective on that?
Go ahead, Amber.
Sure. So we don't have a date or a time to go back into the office yet at this point. And again, from a competition standpoint, it's becoming just more and more of the norm that positions have the opportunity to be 100% remote. We're also a company that's based in the Midwest, so having access to candidates that are not in our location is really key for us in regards to finding the right fit. So I don't know that we will go back to the office. If we do, it's definitely not going to be in the format that it was before March of last year. We might have teams that go back in a hybrid environment if they are local, but I know out of all of my teams, IT is the one that would push the hardest for just an entirely remote experience. And again, in order to be competitive in that market, we need to be able to offer that to candidates if that's what they're looking for. So I don't know that we will go back. It'll just be remote interviews and work for the rest of our lives.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's what it's going to be. A lot more organizations are becoming more open to remote workers, and I think it's overall very good for the ecosystem. But that's just my take. There've been like too much concentration on the coasts for too long a time period, and there is talent out there, which is globally distributed, not just the states, but all over overseas as well. So if more organizations become open to remote hiring, I think, like I said, it's going to be good for the ecosystem. Jeff, what's your perspective on what's going to be the future of coding interviews, and after that, we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I would say in our process, we already had incorporated some of the tools that mirror what our developers use on site, and so we already had them in some stages of the interview process using a device and working with the interface we're using. So moving away from the whiteboard coding exercise to one where they're more comfortable and can configure it, I still see a lot of value there. And we're, I think, ready to experiment with that once we start doing on-sites again.
Got it.
For the future, I think, like we talked about, just further automation of the rubric of results. That's where a lot of the next value comes in.
Got it. That makes sense. And I would personally be very keen to continue working with you on this, get feedback, and see what's your initial impressions, and then obviously iterate based on that feedback. So with that, I'll end the panel discussion today. I sincerely appreciate both you, Jeff and Amber, making time and having this conversation. I definitely enjoyed it. Had tons of things to learn from the conversation. and look forward to a continued engagement with both of you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.